A good Saturday morning to you, Marist College football fans, and welcome, of course, to Tenney Stadium. I'm Phil Trino, along with Matt Suter. We are the Marist College Football Network. Hope you've seen some of our content at maristfootballnetwork.com. And Matt, we want to get this pregame show going off very, very quickly, and we'd like to welcome Jeff Brault onto the stage, if we may, right away. We don't want to keep him waiting.
Yeah, Jeff's got a lot to do today as the color man for the Marist Red Foxes, along with Ed Weir. So, Jeff, thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure. Love what you guys are doing.
So, Jeff, looking at today's contest, it's a Valparaiso team that comes in 28-game losing streak. Is this a pushover for Marist?
No, absolutely not. I think if you talk to the coaching staff, that's the first thing that you'd hear from them as well. This is a team that has some talent. Now, they're starting a lot of freshmen, so it's a lot of young and inexperienced talent, but talent enough that you have to be concerned about them. There are no such thing as an easy win in Division I college football, and if Marist doesn't come to play today, you never know what could happen.
Now, advancing this late into conference play in the Pioneer Football League, have you seen stiff competition week in and week out for the Red Foxes?
Absolutely. The Pioneer Football League is great. Great competition, a really high level of football. And I think it's the right league for Marist to be in. It's nice that there are a handful of schools that embrace non-scholarship football. Mercer and Stetson are going to join the league next year, so even a couple more are coming into the league. It's a nice sell for recruits. You know, the national travel, you get to go to San Diego in November, which isn't a bad deal. And it's been very, very good competition. I think better than I thought it would be when it was announced that Marist would come into this league.
Now, staying with that PFL talk, you're also the play-by-play man for the women's basketball team. So you travel all around. You go down south for the NCAA tournament. You go out west. Have you seen the Marist brand sort of grow through the success of not only the women's basketball team, but also because Marist is now in this national conference?
More often now in airports, it's "Hey Marist" as opposed to "Hey, where's Marist?" Which is the new thing. But it's still, you know, when you aren't a big sweatshirt school, where you're not a school where everybody can look at and go, oh, that's Marist, it's in Poughkeepsie, New York, then there's definitely a bit of branding outreach that goes into it. But that's kind of the goal of an athletics program. That's the goal of the football team when they go to San Diego or Florida. It's the goal of the basketball teams when they go wherever they may be going during the year. So it's good to be able to spread the brand and spread it in a positive way. And Coach P's got a great program here that's been a wonderful, a bunch of great ambassadors for the school.
You speak about head coach, of course, Jim Parity. Part of what he's done now after the Red Foxes have joined the PFL is bringing players from a number of different states, actually more than 10 currently on this roster. What have you enjoyed most about covering this team?
Well, let's talk about the seniors. It is senior day. This is the first class that Coach P could really sell the Pioneer Football League to. They were here in the transition year where Marist was an independent, but it was known when these kids were recruited that they were going to be part of the Pioneer Football League. And what Coach P said, the biggest thing that he gets out of this class and the class that have followed it is a love of football. Football is a bigger priority in the lives of these athletes, this senior class, and the classes that follow than it was in the ones that came before it. And I think that has to do with the competition level that you get in the Pioneer Football League. And it's really been nice to watch guys like Ryan Dinnebiel, Jaquan Bryant, Kevin Fitzpatrick, guys like that, set that as the bar for this program and make Marist football a much more serious commitment than it was in the past.
What players have really stood out for you from this senior class in particular? Again, it's a large senior class. 17 are being honored today. Who are some of the ones that have impressed you throughout your years of covering this team?
Well, Tommy Riley, for one, for what he's been able to do, battling through some injuries. He came back from a torn ACL, I think, faster than anyone in recorded history has come back from a torn ACL. And he's battled, and he won his starting job back from Chucky Looney. And he's played very well, and he's been fun to watch. And he's come on the heels of some very good quarterbacks, too. James Luft, Chris Dabowski. So he had big shoes to fill, and he did it admirably. Ryan Dinnebiel in the goal line situation, you know, he shoots up the Marist touchdown list. Well-deserved, one of the better goal line backs that we've had here. Kevin Fitzpatrick has been a steady possession receiver. You know, he's never been the guy. He's always played with James Lamacchia, or he's played with Mike Rios. He's always had a big play threat with him, but he's been that steady presence in the lineup every week. Steve Corrett on the offensive line, filling the left tackle spot, has been a joy. And then Jaquan Bryant, maybe one of the most exciting defensive playmakers at the cornerback spot that we've had here at Marist.
And how about some keys today against Valparaiso, the Crusaders? If you could identify some things that would be crucial for Marist to execute, what would they be?
Well, number one, they got to start fast. Marist has only scored one first-quarter touchdown all year long, and they have to start fast today against Valpo. When you've got a team that's lost 28 straight games, you don't want to give them any sort of hope. Valparaiso is a team that if you let them, they can hang around. They were down 14-3 at the half against Dayton. So a fast start's going to be key for Marist in this game. That's number one. Penalty-free football, turnover-free football. Marist has to prove that they're the more disciplined team on the field today in order to, again, not give Valparaiso an opening to end that losing streak.
Now, looking at this season as a whole for Marist, they started off with that great win, Coach Parody's 100th win, but then they sort of hit the road and just went on that tough losing streak. They haven't won at home since the beginning of last season. How much would a win mean to these seniors today?
I asked Coach P that exact same question yesterday when I talked to him, and the general consensus is this team doesn't really think about the fact that they haven't won at home. They focus so much on defending the home field, but the fact that they haven't yet won this year at home never really comes up because they've gotten some good road wins. They've had wins on the season that they can celebrate. It hasn't really come up for them that, hey, we really want to get a win at home on senior day, but hey, everybody wants to get a win at home on senior day, and it would be a very big disappointment if Marist was not able to get a win today.
Jeff, how about the injury bug? It seems like from the beginning of the year, it's really caught on to the Red Foxes. Of course, the big names that we've seen, Chucky Looney being out with a lower leg injury, Michael Rios as well. How do you think the team has dealt with that?
Well, it's tough. The good news is Coach P said this is probably offensively where most of the injuries have been, and not to discount what happened to Mike Hageman coming back from his shoulder injury, but most of the injuries, the key injuries, have been offensive. Mike Rios, Chucky Looney, Ryan Dinnebiel, like you mentioned, Steve Coretta, who is probably the best offensive lineman, has been banged up. These guys, Coach P has been lucky that he's had enough depth behind them that the people that have come in to step up, whether it's Bart Lenahan or Peter Evans on the offensive line or Atik Lucas or Wale Anakoya in the running game, these guys are better than what the second line used to be. So the drop-off has been less. That's not to minimize the effect that these injuries have had, but Coach P believes that his depth is why you haven't necessarily seen a drop-off in production when Marist, unfortunately, has been hit with some key injuries at times.
Sticking with that injury question, you mentioned, of course, Chucky Looney went down with an injury, but then you look at a guy like Mike Rios, who you mentioned earlier, a big downfield threat. Do you think that the season would have gone a little differently had those two been healthy the entire season?
I think it would have been interesting. It's very hard to predict something like that. I think losing Mike Rios really hurt. Rios stretched the field. Rios would have made it easier on the running game, which has struggled at times. Rios would have made it easier on Kevin Fitzpatrick to find a little more room. Same thing with Bart Lenahan and Byron Gardner and the rest of the wide receivers. Armani Martin got hurt as well, too, who showed that he might be able to be a big play threat in the absence of Mike Rios. And then, of course, Martin got dinged up, so sticking with their injury bug. Might the season be different? Possibly. I think everybody wants to have their top offensive lineman, their top running back, and their top wide receiver healthy, but that wasn't the case this year, and I think Marist has performed admirably with the adversity they've dealt with.
And Jeff, how about yourself personally? Looking forward to this last broadcast, of course, being paired with Ed Weir of this 2011 season. Final thoughts on the last call you'll have this year?
It's great. I'm hoping for a win. I'm hoping for a win here at home. It's always nice, and I'm just excited to. Last week was really fun in the snow. It was nice to see Marist come back and make a game of it in the fourth quarter with those 13 fourth quarter points. But we're ready for a win at home. I'm ready to call a win at home. That's when I'll have fun today.
All right, that was Jeff Ferrald. He's the color man for Marist football. He's also the play-by-play man for Marist women's basketball. Jeff, thank you so much for joining us. Hop on back to the booth, and we'll see you up there come kickoff.
All right, thanks, Matt. Thanks, Phil. Stay warm.
Definitely. Thanks, Jeff. And so just to reset for anyone that just may be walking by our set right now, we are the Marist Football Network. Rachel Blair working the camera. Mike Quinn doing great PR stuff as always. Amanda Master-Birdie had to skip out a bit early today. I'm Phil Trino. He's Matt Suter.
And so looking at the contest today, it's Marist Valparaiso. The big storyline today is that Valparaiso, 28-game losing streak, comes into Marist on their senior day. So if there's one day for a win for Marist, it's today, especially since their last home win came in the very first home game of the 2010 season.
No, it certainly is, and I think the major storyline, if we had to identify one today, Matt, would be the struggles of the Crusaders and how the Red Foxes can sort of not get caught in a trap game of sorts. I think Valparaiso, while they currently are winless on the season, they are a member of the PFL. They can certainly compete. They have a number of talented athletes. Never an easy win in football.
No, in Valparaiso, they're a decent team. When you look at their stats, their offensive stats really are solid, but it's the defense that crushes them. They give up 51 points per game, 550 yards of total offense. So this is going to be an interesting dynamic because Marist is known more for their defense than for their offense. So it'll be interesting to see if Marist can sort of exploit that weak defense that the Crusaders show.
No, definitely. We've seen the Red Foxes bounce in between the first, second, and third ranked defenses in the PFL. I think that's a very, very impressive for a unit that, as we touched on with Jeff, has had a bit of injuries and also has a number of younger players, playing as well. So I think it's a very impressive stat to see the defense has really blossomed so well. And the offense coming into its own with, at one point we discussed so often on our pregame shows, the team could not eclipse 60 yards rushing on the ground. I thought that was a major factor for them to improve on.
And then just staying with that idea of having such a strong defense, the Pioneer Football League is a strong conference, again, as Jeff Brault said, but it's also a strong offensive conference, in particular passing offense. The PFL is the highest rated passing conference in all of FCS, so that says a lot to Marist that their pass defense, that their defense in general is the best in such a strong offensive conference.
Oh, it most certainly is, and I think because it's such an offensively driven league, it's a great deal of fun to watch. I mean, I've enjoyed over the past few seasons covering the likes of Drake, Dayton, Jacksonville, who have really, high-powered offense, and we can't forget about the Morehead State Eagles, who, while they score 35 points a game, also managed to give up 35 points per game. That's sort of been their downfall, but yes, plenty of offense.
And sticking with this PFL talk, just taking a look at the stats, you have Jacksonville, who's still undefeated at 5-0. You have Drake and San Diego, both a one-loss team. And then it sort of falls off after that. You have Campbell and Dayton 4-2, but they're not really in the race. And then you really get to the bottom tier in terms of the Marist, the Morehead State, the Davidson, and the Valparaiso. So the last couple of weeks are interesting for a team like Drake, for a team like Jacksonville. They haven't really played the top competition just yet.
No, certainly, and plenty football to discuss. We want to welcome Mike Quinn, though, onto the stage, if you may. He has a very, very special guest that will be joining us today, someone who has a hand in the development of Marist athletics as a whole. So plenty of stuff to get to today with the Marist and the Valparaiso contest, and we want to welcome Mike Quinn up onto the stage, our very own group member with the Marist College Football Network.
So we'll hand it off to Mike and take it away.
We at the Marist Football Network are very pleased to be joined by Mike Millay. He was the first head football coach for Marist when it was a varsity team. And my first question for you is that in 1970 you had you can say whether it was an honor or privilege, but you were able to coach one of Marist's most famous alumni, Bill O'Reilly. What kind of experience was that?
It was interesting. Okay, Bill was an excellent athlete and an excellent football player. He was an outstanding punter for us. He led the nation that year in punting in club football. I know that's been disputed on some levels when he made a comment a couple of years ago at the Super Bowl, but that is accurate. And like I said, he was a hard-working guy and was a good teammate. But he did lead the nation in punting, and that had to do with a lot of our success. We went undefeated that year. We were 8-0. We lost to St. John's for the national championship on Thanksgiving Day in '70. But Bill was an integral part of that team and that program.
Now, you were the first head football coach for the varsity program, but before that, there was the club program where you were a defensive line coach and also the defensive coordinator.
Correct.
What was that experience like going from being a club team and then going to the varsity program?
The club team was an interesting thing. I mean, it was an operation put together by students, run by students, and was very successful. When we moved up to the varsity level, it probably had a bit of a negative impact because up until that point, we knew it was a student-run operation, and that's the way the players approached it. When we became a varsity team, we weren't really in a position, the school really wasn't in a position to handle the program on a full varsity mode. And so sometimes in those first few years, we might have been better off as a club, being able to go out and garner some additional revenue to help us out. As things moved on, especially after Dr. Murray arrived and things began to expand in the athletic department with Brian Colery, who had been the head football coach at Iona, came up as the athletic director. That's when things really started to take off for the football program, and we began to feel that we were a legitimate varsity level program. So that would have been, early 80s.
Now, when it was a club, they were referred to as the Marist Vikings, and then they became the Marist Red Foxes. Did you have any part in changing the team's name or mascot?
No, the Vikings had been adopted by the students in '65. I actually saw their very first season. I was a high school senior at Lord's High School, and so we used to always go to the games at Stitzel Field on Saturday night after our games. But the players had adopted that. When we became varsity, the mascot for all the varsity teams was the Red Foxes, so that just became a step we took.
And when you were in the club program as the defensive line coach and the defensive coordinator, I talked to Mr. Eberth earlier, the vice president for advancement, and he said that they had a lot of budget issues with, they had to go to a deli and make a deal with them to try to get a lot of sandwiches to feed, a football team. What other kind of issues did you have to deal with when you were a club team compared to when you were a varsity team?
Well, for one thing, we normally traveled in a car caravan.
Yeah.
Okay. Wherever we were going to play, whether it was Providence, Assumption College up in Worcester, we probably went in about 20 cars. and some of those were not the greatest vehicles. I can remember one of our defensive tackles asking if I could swap a couple of linemen out of his back seat for a couple of defensive backs on the way back because a spring had broken in his car. So, and those were legitimate things. But we continued with that the first couple of years we were varsity. The first scrimmage we played as a varsity team against the University of New Haven, we went over in 22 cars to New Haven on a Friday night. So that's what I'm saying. Although we went from club to varsity, things didn't change that much the first couple of years. It was much later. And then, of course, you look at this facility, and it's totally different.
So what do you think of this facility? Did you imagine seeing the tennis stadium, the turf field, the whole football program grow to be this way when you were a football coach back in the 70s?
No, I never did. I don't think anybody could have believed this. You have to understand, the first couple of years when we had the field adjacent to the McCann Center, our first day of practice, the players lined up on one sideline and walked across the field, putting rocks in their helmets, and then when they got to the far side, they dumped them over the fence down to by the railroad tracks. Mm-hmm. I mean, those are the conditions those guys played under, and maybe gave them an impetus to play it just a little bit more. But nobody would have envisioned this. I think it's remarkable that it's been done, and it's a great step for the school. I have a lot of pride in my years here, and that's why I've come back and been working with Jack on the football challenge. But no one could have envisioned this, other than probably Dr. Murray, who seems to have an ability to look at things on campus and see what they could look at much better.
Dr. Murray, who's been here for 32 years, has done a lot of work for the school, adding a lot of new buildings. Now, you know football very well, obviously, and you know the history of Marist, but can I ask you to kind of speculate a little bit on this game against Valparaiso for Marist, your thoughts on the game and the possible outcome?
Well, I've seen Marist play a couple times this year, and I think they've played very, very well. I thought last week's game, if not for the weather, they had an excellent opportunity to be involved in it. And the thing that's impressed me the most, and that I've always seen in Marist athletes, is a desire to play hard and play to the last whistle. I truly think, I know Valparaiso is not doing very well, but I think they've got an excellent opportunity to be successful, especially senior day. You know, everybody seems to step up on senior day because you want to give your teammates a good farewell.
All right. I'd like to say thank you for joining us here on the Marist Football Network. I'll let you go back to the alumni reception, which there's probably quality food down there for you. And thank you for everything you did in the early years of Marist athletics, and enjoy the game.
Thanks, Mike.
And we want to hand this bag off to Matt and Phil right now. Thank you so much. That was excellent.
Appreciate it, guys.
Take care.
Best of luck.
Thank you very much.
So once again, thanks very much for joining us. And for anyone that has checked out all of our content on the MaristFootballNetwork.com, some great insight there from Mike Millay. Really great way, Matt, to hear and see, I suppose, about the early years of Marist athletics.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people forget that Marist has not always been, a varsity sport here. At the very outset of it, like Mike was mentioning, we were the Marist Vikings at the club level, and the program really has grown into what it is, and it's just something that you just don't think about when you step foot on this campus as a student.
No, most definitely, that's correct. And what's so fascinating, I think, of course, today being senior day, about this group of 17 seniors on this team, during the 2008 campaign, which of course was our first year as freshmen at Marist College, Marist competed as an FCS independent. So they had matchups during that season with Bryant and now Iona College, who was formerly part of the MAC football conference, which was defunct after 2007. So the Red Foxes really had a chance to see during that season some teams they typically wouldn't.
And staying with that idea of growth in the program, Marist joining the PFL has just been part of that growth. But, you look back in some of the teams that we played in, there still are some common conference opponents, as Marist still plays Bucknell. They played Lehigh that very first year, so there's still that Patriot League that Marist will play a few teams in the Patriot League every year. But just sort of the way that all this PFL has come together and how successful it has been for Marist is something really unique for this, in particular, this group of seniors, because like you mentioned, they played that independent schedule and then jumped into the conference schedule.
And in fairness to all our football fans that may not be so up to date with the lingo, we throw out FCS, FBS. To give everyone a ballpark idea about FCS, that stands for Football Championship Subdivision. It is Division 1. Formerly, it was called Division 1 AA. The FBS is what you would typically see. You're watching a big college football game on Saturday afternoon. That would be FBS. That's the Football Bowl subdivision.
Yeah, you won't get Texas or Notre Dame coming to Poughkeepsie anytime soon. But getting a little bit more in, talking about this senior class, you have a lot of guys that have contributed since they were since they stepped on campus, you have guys like, Jim Desitel and, Jaquan Bryan and Kevin Fitzpatrick, all these guys that have put in basically 4 years on the field. And then you have those guys that, had to wait out their time, sort of like Tommy Riley, who had to play behind Chris Dabowski for a few years before he earned the starting job. And this dynamic of seniors has been fairly unique. I keep bringing that word up with this group because of the way that they've all sort of come together in this, their final home game here in Poughkeepsie.
I think what's an interesting dynamic, I would say, about the game of football, especially at the collegiate level, is you have a lot of players who, at least in non-scholarship situations, are paying their own way to play this game. There is a very good possibility that with a roster of 110 players, they may go 4 or even 5 seasons without ever touching the field, but yet coming to practice, putting in their 3+ hours every day, simply because they enjoy being around the sport.
And that's exactly what it is. It's just for love of the game at that point, because the Pioneer Football League is a non-scholarship conference. So if any of these players are getting money, it's academic, it's not football related. So that still shows that they're students first, and that gets lost in the big shuffle of those, those Floridas. How many rumors would you hear about Tim Tebow not going to class, or Matt Leinart taking ballroom dancing his 5th year at USC? And that's not what you get here. You have students that are students first. That's exactly what they are, and they're athletes second. And to Coach Barity's credit, and basically most coaches here at Marist, academics are are the number one priority for these athletes.
You're absolutely right about that, and I think what's even more impressive is given the high academic standards. In fact, that was the tag that we led our MFN promo with, was that having Division I football located in the Northeast with some of the nation's top academic institutions, I would say, yet they've still managed to play football at a very, very high level. Many of the teams in the PFL, 3 or 4, have actually been ranked in the top 25 FCS over the past 2 years.
And that says a testament. Again, you have a lot of teams that could be ranked. Jacksonville, as we mentioned earlier, still undefeated. And then you have a team like Valparaiso, the team Marist is taking on today, 0-28 in their last 28 games. And, win this on this season. Again, 51 points given up per game, 550 yards. Those are like video game stats. If you're, if you're the team that you're playing as, you just don't hear those stats, especially for an entire season. This Valpo defense just really is not that good.
And definitely, and Matt, just to reset for all the folks who may be walking by our set once again, we are the Marist Football Network. You can access our website at maristfootballnetwork.com. We are a senior capstone project. I'm Phil Trino with Matt Suter, Mike Quinn and Rachel Blair off camera at the moment, and Amanda Mastroberti as well. Yeah,
Amanda Mastroberti somewhere on the train going down to New York City right now for New Jersey Devils. She's on the train for a New Jersey Devils broadcast. But, and that's one of the things we wanted to do this year, was sort of bring Marist football to the forefront like never before. There's a radio cast of this game. You can find some coverage in the Poughkeepsie Journal. Of course, go redfoxes.com. But in terms of the interviews with players and the coverage that we've been providing here on the field in our weekly pregame shows, and I think that it's something that we can say safely, all of us have enjoyed to the point that, we almost don't want it to end because we've been having so much fun with this project.
No, most certainly. And I know that she's standing very patiently on the sidelines here next to the camera. She thinks that we're not going to call her up onto the stage. Rachel, we really would love if you could join us. We promised that all the group members present today would have a chat. It's our own senior day.
Come on, there we go. Here we go. So now we are being joined by Rachel Blair, our production whiz kid over here. She doesn't get on camera too much, but
and for the folks at home, although this may be hard to believe, all the wonderful content you see in our YouTube videos, that's not magic. It's not put together simply because we have a great in-studio show. That's really a big thanks to Rachel and Amanda.
So Rachel, let's get to know Rachel Blair a little bit right now. So why don't you come in the middle here so we're not, okay, that works too. Okay, well, okay, all right. So okay. Rachel, sort of the one behind the camera, what are you looking to do after graduation here?
Oh, now I have my own mic, so technically I can talk.
I know you're not used to this, but
I know, this is weird. Well, Phil gave me the mic, so it's okay. I don't know. That's such a tough question, and that's the question that I get asked, whenever, because I don't really know exactly what I want to do. I'll kind of take whatever, because I would work in sports, but I work in TV, and whatever will take me is kind of the direction I'll go in.
All right, now it's very clear that you are not enjoying this, so we'll take 1 second here, and we'll let you look right at the camera, and just have your parting words here from the production that you do every week. You do such a great job. What do you want to say to anyone that's watching this right now?
Well, I hope everyone has enjoyed all our videos, all the multiple hours that I have put in to edit and produce these videos. And I hope everyone thinks they look good and everyone's been enjoying it. I know people have been watching, so hopefully it stays up. I don't know what you want me to say. You put me on the spot, and I don't really know.
All right,
I know,
Rachel.
I'm
We'll
making-
let you hop
making it
off
up.
here.
Yeah.
All right, well, that is Rachel Blair. As we said, everybody, it is our senior day as well. This is the last time that we'll do this. So, Rachel, thanks for hopping up with us.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Today, of course, the matchup between the Marist College Red Foxes and the visiting Valparaiso Crusaders, a team that, Matt, has not won in quite some time.
Yeah, this Valparaiso team, their last win was the second game of the 2009 campaign. So this is a team that really is not used to winning. There's some kids on this team who have never won a game, some juniors on this team who forgot what it feels like to win. And on this day of all days, this is the team that Marist wants to play on their senior day for the chance to win their first home game since the beginning of last season.
No, certainly, when you speak about a team in Valparaiso, many of their players not having won a game, we need to remember that some of the seniors on this Marist team, all 17 of them, they were part of a very successful 7-4 year 2 seasons ago.
That 7-4 team was a very strong squad, and I think some people were a little surprised by it because Marist had struggled in the year previous, that year, and the independent schedule, as we were talking about before, and then they made that jump to the Pioneer Football League, and I think some people were a little nervous that that might be too big of a step up because there were teams like Jacksonville and Drake and Butler, teams with very good pedigrees, and then Marist just sort of propelled themselves into a very good season at 7-4. At one point, I believe they had a 5-game winning streak, so that was a very strong team, and again, that was a team that a lot of these seniors today had integral parts on.
It was a very, very impressive effort by the Red Foxes in that year. I remember I had the pleasure of covering it for the Marist College Circle, our student newspaper, and honestly, it was a surprise given that you have to prepare intricately every single week for the 11 different teams that you'll face, many of which were ranked in the top 25 of the FCS, not to mention traveling far distances on plane rides when most of these players were used to simple bus rides.
And that's the one thing about the Pioneer Football League is there's no really league identity. You think about this Big Ten football, and you think about a running game and a strong defense. You think about the SEC. That's you get a lot of pro style. You think about the Big 12, and that's more shootout offenses. But that's not something you have here in the Pioneer Football League. You have some teams like we'll see from Valparaiso today who runs a wing T formation. You have a team like Marist who runs the spread. You have a team like Jacksonville who also runs the spread. Campbell, everything goes out of that option. So every team brings something unique to the table. And that's not necessarily a conference identity like you get with those FBS conferences.
You mentioned the identity or maybe lack thereof a little bit of the PFL. I think a lot of that has to do, Matt, with the geography. We've got, of course, the Red Foxes in New York. You have teams in Indiana. You have teams in Iowa. Of course, San Diego, Florida as well, North Carolina. So really spanning nearly the entire United States.
And that does take a toll on these players. They'll have to miss their Friday classes, which again I'm sure they're not all that upset about. But you got to wake up early, you got to hop on a plane. You're not sleeping in your bed every night, and that's why home games are so important for these teams because they don't have to have that added factor. And sometimes it's not that big of a deal when you hop on a bus to go to Bucknell. Yeah, it's a 3-hour bus ride, but that's really it. You're there and back, and it's a pretty simple trip. But when you have to go through the whole thing of heading down on a bus all the way to Newark or JFK and hopping on a 3-hour flight back and forth, it's pretty tough. And again, there's just that jet lag, that mental fatigue that comes into play once you finally step on the field.
And, we may joke about it here, but I can guarantee you that the coaches would not think it's very funny. I remember having a conversation 2 seasons ago with head coach Jim Parody and the associate head coach Scott Rumsey about the travel preparations. How do you get 50-plus players ready with all their identification cards, their material, their team uniforms, and proper equipment ready to travel? They said it's a big endeavor. A lot of gray hairs have come out of trying to do that.
And a lot of credit has to be given also to the student managers of the team because there are some behind-the-scenes people, just like we have Rachel, who's usually behind the scenes with us. There are some behind-the-scenes people with the team, again, like those student managers. And there's a lot of work that goes unnoticed in terms of them doing the laundry or preparing food orders, getting stuff ready for officials, and that is a huge part of any team really. Is that's because the players then don't necessarily have to worry about it. They can just sort of focus on getting themselves ready for the game, and they can know that all that little stuff can sort of be taken care of by somebody else.
And as far as taking care of business, the Red Foxes, of course, today playing the Valparaiso Crusaders. And for all the folks who may be just joining us now, we are the Marist Football Network. We've had the pleasure for our senior capstone project of covering this team during his 2011 campaign. And I think we've had the chance, Matt, to uncover some awesome storylines.
And that's one of the things that we've all had fun with is interviewing 2-3 different players every week and just sort of finding out more about them and getting more of their personality because football certainly is not like basketball. You don't see players on the court. You don't get to see their faces all the time. You might hear a name over and over, but you never really get to see what they look like, especially certainly don't hear them talk, answer questions. So that's been one of the neat things, and one of the most fun parts I've had is this project is when we have a player stand in front of one of our backdrops and sort of give a little tagline in terms of I'm so-and-so and this is the Marist Football Network. It seems that they really don't like it. They have a hard time with it, and when they turn away and we take a lot of takes, but seeing them sort of as those humans, those college kids, has been really enjoyable, I know, at least for me.
No, it has, and sort of taking the helmet off is what we've aimed to do here, and I think he may be tired of being my pen pal now, but a new coach on the staff of Jim Parody, Tunde Igboke, has been phenomenal in booking all the interviews, and when all is said and done, Matt, we are in the ballpark of having interviewed on camera roughly 40 players.
And again, this is a team of about 110. So when you look at it, getting about half the team, a little under half the team, is really something neat because, again, you might get a quote from a player here and there after a game story. You might just run into a player here and there in the McCann Center, maybe a snippet here. But we have uncovered some really cool stories. We've heard Tommy Riley talk about how coming back from his injury he was able to earn the spot back, and how we've interviewed 3 generations of Riley men, and then you just have other players coming in. Fed Celestin talking about what it was like to be the only sophomore on an offensive line full of freshmen last year and how that's propelled him to a leadership role this year. So you just get these behind the scenes aspects that's making these guys more human than just the red jerseys they wear out on the field.
And by far the most interesting project we've worked on, I would have to say, is getting 14 offensive linemen into the mix with some of the promos and skits that we filmed. This was, of course, for any of you that have seen our commercials, a take on the This Is Sports Center commercials that ESPN features. We got a lot of the offensive linemen here, of course, a unit on this team that doesn't get a great deal of recognition, as with any football team, perhaps.
Yeah, no football team, no offensive line, no defensive line a little bit more, but certainly no offensive line gets what they deserve. And so we sort of had a lot of fun filming. It was about an hour, and we expected maybe 5 or 6 offensive linemen to come into the studio, and 3 showed up, and we said, are there any more coming? They said, yeah, they're on their way. 2 more showed up, and we said, okay, so let's get going. And they said, well, we got a few more, and we were a little surprised. And then we said, so how many are coming? And they said, everyone. So we literally had a studio full of offensive linemen, and then the MFN, and it was sort of a sight to see, and it was clear that they were having fun with it, not so much in the skits that they were in, but laughing at their teammates when it was their turn to film something.
Well, I mean, here's the thing as far as the offensive line is concerned, which can be said, I would say, about for many positions. There's only 5 of them on the field at one time for the down lineman unit, but yet there are a number of players that are needed to have practices day in and day out.
Yeah, and that's something, again, that you don't really think about is this idea of a scout team, and how the first offense going against the scout team defense can really improve not only the players on that first team offense, but also the players on that scout team. That's how these players will get noticed by their coaches, because they're out there every day, really busting their hump to just make that play and make that impact on the coach. And it's a little cliche at this point, but you can't help but think of Rudy from the movie Rudy at Notre Dame. This is a guy that just tried so hard on that scout team, and that's how he made himself noticed. And that's how a lot of these players will get that big chance. If they have to play that scout team, that very first time as a freshman, they can show a coach how hard they try and that they're really there for the love of the game. And that speaks volumes about not only a skill level, but the character as well.
No, most certainly does. And just to reset once again, for all the folks that happen to be walking by our set right now, we are just under 24 minutes to a noon kickoff between the host Marist College Red Foxes and the visiting Valparaiso Crusaders.
And of course, senior day here at Marist. A good day. Finally, we have some nice weather here. We haven't really had great weather for a football game since the home opener, which seems like an eternity ago against Georgetown. But it's a little chilly here. But I mean, this is really what you have to ask for. It's November 5th. The sun's out. There's literally not a cloud in the sky, and you got that little nip in the air. And this is a fun time to play a football game because, again, no one's going to be wearing long sleeves, but the adrenaline sort of takes you through all the sweat, that's going out into it. It's just a gorgeous, gorgeous day for these seniors to send out their career.
No, most certainly. And I would have to say, for us personally, not that we necessarily got snubbed by Mother Nature, but she wasn't always very, very cooperative for us. Of course, there were the contests against Drake and Jacksonville that we were unable to put on this pregame show because of the precipitation.
And last week was a lot of fun it was fun for us since we were up in the press box nice and warm, but the snow had a big effect on last week's game, and it's a little funny to look back at the field now and you see all this snow piled up to the side that has all those little rubber pellets in it. It makes it look, pretty gross. But it was very unique to see the couple of inches that were on the field last week and have the Marist athletic director and his staff, Tim Murray, out shoveling lines on the field every 5 yards. And it was something that most of these players have never seen because they come from a Florida, they come from a California, they don't come from cold weather spots. And it was the first home game in the snow for Marist since 1997, back when Siena had a football team.
And the players certainly had a great time, I believe, at least from what they've told us. I don't know how they necessarily felt so cold on the field. Footing was a bit of an issue, but overall, I think just a cool sight to really be seen.
Yeah, and unfortunately, there weren't a lot of people in the crowd because the weather was inclement, but it was just sort of added that little more of a bit of a fun aspect, almost a backyard football game. You think about going out and just playing football with your friends in the snow, and that's what it almost reminded me of, was seeing these guys out on the field, just sort of slipping all over the place.
We've gotten the signal from Mike Quinn. That will do it for the final pregame show for the Marist College Football Network. For Phil Trino, he's Matt Suter. Thanks so much for watching and for all your support this entire season. Please keep up with our website once again, maristfootballnetwork.com.